Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today! Happy New Year! What better way to greet 2025 than with a 2-litre 4-cylinder with 800 horsepower and a power curve that's as steep as the depreciation on an electric Volkswagen. Fitting an engine as unpredictable as this into a 55-year-old car that weighs less than 900 kilos is a terrible idea, which is exactly why it's here. As usual, every upgrade has been applied, including the wide body and the body rigidity increase. To begin with, none of the settings have been adjusted except for the downforce, which is maxed, and the transmission, which has already been adjusted to suit this car. The Skyline has aftermarket wheels one size up from standard. I didn't want to increase the size too much since it can make the car slightly more agile and as a result harder to control, especially on bumpy tracks. It has a front splitter for front downforce and a custom wing set for the maximum rear downforce. I wouldn't recommend the Type A rear wing with this engine swap since it generates less rear downforce. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. The chosen track today was the Autopolis circuit. The Skyline, as expected, has a mountain of turbo lag which makes it very difficult to predict around corners. When the car is off boost, it feels sluggish and has almost no response. But then in a split second, 800 horsepower is lighting up the rear tyres and trying to spin the car and kill you. However, if you're good at throttle control, this car isn't actually as bad as you might expect. Usually the body roll makes the car feel uncontrollable, but in this case it's not actually the worst part of the car. Either way, my first adjustment was still to increase the natural frequency. This will reduce body movement and hopefully make the car feel more predictable. I also increased anti-roll bar stiffness, more so at the rear to help reduce instability when braking. I also lowered it, because it looks cool. The reduction in body roll made the car feel more predictable when entering a corner. The downside with power like this is that it can make the rear end feel even more snappy on corner exit. The rest of my tuning and tweaking will have to try and address this. You utter bastard. Next up, I adjusted the differential. I increased initial torque, which should hopefully make the car less twitchy. Decreasing acceleration sensitivity should make the car less quick to spin its wheels when exiting a corner. Reducing braking sensitivity should make the brakes feel more effective. I also slightly decreased front downforce to improve high-speed stability, something this car sorely lacks. The differences were subtle, but the Skyline felt generally more well-behaved. At this point, the car's biggest enemy is still its engine and the lack of rear traction, both of which make this car rather a handful. For the final tweaks, I increased compression, which usually helps the car deal with curbs better. I decreased camber, which will help slightly with traction and braking as well. I also added some rear toe in to reduce power oversteer, and I added some front toe out to reduce lift-off oversteer. I also added around 70 kilograms of ballast weight to the rear to get the car to a 50-50 weight distribution, which should reduce wheel spin. The added weight improved traction out of corners, however braking did suffer slightly as a result, and having a lighter front end added slightly more lift-off oversteer. Despite the drawbacks, the Skyline was undoubtedly faster. At this point, the car was more or less complete, so it was of course time to head to the Nurburgring to see how the car would fare. I made a few more changes to make the Skyline of cocaine a tad more controllable for the Nordschleifer's more challenging sections. More weight was added, and its position was moved further forward to reduce lift-off oversteer. This is potentially one of the engine swaps I dislike the most in all of Gran Turismo. It's an interesting concept, a highly strung 4-cylinder engine with massive boost in a lightweight rear-wheel drive classic. The issue is, it just sort of doesn't work. A good few of my viewers, along with people on the GT Planet forum, have complained about the Suzuki Escudo engine swap being far too laggy, but this engine is very similar, albeit slightly less extreme. The thing is, that Suzuki engine can be fitted to cars with 4-wheel drive, more downforce, and a more modern chassis. This LZ20 engine has very similar power delivery, but it's only available in old, floppy, lightweight classic cars with rear-wheel drive, or the Gredi Fugu Z, which is more or less the same sort of thing. If this engine was available for something like the Nissan Silvia or the 180SX, it may make more sense. The other thing that I don't like about this engine is the sound. I refuse to believe that the Skyline Super Silhouette race car sounded this flat and muted. I think, personally, that something like a V6 from one of the Fairlady Z cars would have been more suited to this classic Skyline. Still, it doesn't handle quite as badly as you might expect. It's by no means an easy car to drive, and to be fair, the same car with the standard engine is no walk in the park, but it only took one attempt to get a respectable lap in. The same cannot be said of the Volvo 240, which I am still salty about. In the end, the Skyline managed a 6 minutes 36, just behind the Hellcat Jeep and just ahead of the K24 Jimny. I haven't yet decided if that's respectable or a bit shit. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where I'm driving a car that doesn't have a turbo with an engine attached. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I'd greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care, and ta-ra.